Practice problem number 3 for chapter 21. And as you can see here, this is an extension of this exercise here that was completed in practice problem number 2. What I want to do for this one here is to compute the break even in units and also compute the break even in dollar sales based on the information that's provided to us for company A and company B. So it looks like we have everything already filled out. We have all of the amounts and the numbers that are needed in order to compute break even in units and dollar sales. So I'm going to start off with company A. And I'm going to take this on a step-by-step basis. So in order to figure out what the break even in units should be, we have to first figure out what our contribution margin per unit is. So in order to figure out our contribution margin per unit, yes, the answers are already there. But again, I want to take this step by step, and I want to just do it that way. So that way you understand that you have to complete step 1 in order to get to step 2, which is figuring out what the break even in units is. So step 1, we got to figure out what our contribution margin per unit is. So for company A, to figure that out, we're going to take the sales per unit of $65, subtract out the variable cost. I'm going to just abbreviate it VC, that's variable cost, per unit. That's going to give us 47, which means that our contribution margin, I'm going to abbreviate that, CM per unit, is going to be $18 per unit. So that's step 1. Step 2, let me put on here the steps. Step 1 and then step 2. Step 2, we now can go ahead and determine what our break even in units is going to be, or what needs to be in order for the company to break even. So the company needs to figure out how many units needs to be sold in order to break even. Okay, so the formula for that is going to be fixed costs, total fixed costs, divided by contribution margin per unit. So CM per unit. Okay, now the reason for that being is because the whole point in figuring out the break even in units, you have to figure out first what the contribution margin per unit is should be, or what is it, because contribution margin is taking your sales and subtracting out the variable costs, so you can get what it is that is left over that's going to be contributing to your fixed costs. So at the bottom line is that your income is going to be zero. You're not going to make any money, but you want to make sure that you are able to pay off your fixed costs at least. So here, with this formula, total fixed costs for company A, we have, let's see, $11,200. Okay, that's up here for company A. And then our contribution margin per unit was done in step 1, which is $18. Okay, so to compute the break even in units, we're going to take 11,200 divided by $18. That's going to give us $622.22 repeated. So I'm just going to round this to the nearest whole dollar and just say $622. I mean, why am I saying dollars? Units. So used to saying dollars. Okay, this is units. Okay, so what does this tell you here? This tells you that in order for the company to break even, the company has to sell 622 units in order to cover their total fixed costs of $11,200. This is what it's telling you. So this is, let's see, company A. Now we're going to do company B. I'm going to bring company B over here. Okay, step 1. Calculate the contribution margin per unit. So in this case, we're going to bring in the sales. Okay, total, not total sales, sales per unit, which is $42. So sales per unit, $42. Variable cost per unit, which is $20, which means that our contribution margin per unit is going to be $22. Step 2, compute the break-even in units. So we're going to bring in the formula of total fixed costs divided by contribution margin per unit. Okay, so our total fixed costs comes out to be $19,750 for company B. And then our contribution margin per unit is $22 per unit. So 19,750 divided by 22, that gives us 897 units and 7272723. So I'm going to round this to the nearest whole dollar and just round it to 898. So 898 units is the answer. So this tells us that in order for company B to break even, they have to sell 898 units in order for them to A, yes, break even, and B, cover their total fixed cost of $19,750. So this is the break even in units. Now I'm going to go to break even in dollars. Okay, so what does that look like? Break even in dollars. So when it comes to the break even in dollars, it's pretty similar to figuring out what the numbers should be, or what the numbers are going to be for a company to break even in units. So for company A and company B, this is going to be a two-step process similar to the computing or determining what the break even in units is. So I'm going to put on here step 1. We have to first figure out what the contribution margin ratio is going to be. Okay, to calculate the contribution margin ratio, we're going to go ahead and take the contribution margin per unit, and since it's a ratio, we're going to have to divide it by sales per unit. Okay, this is step 1. So contribution margin per unit for company A, that's $18, divided by the sales per unit for company A, that was $65. So I have a feeling this isn't going to be a solid number like 20%, 50%, 40%. This is probably something that we're going to have to round. So 18 divided by 65. Yep, that's going to be 0.2769230077. So I'm going to just round it to the nearest to the nearest second decimal place. So 0.276, I'm just going to round it to 28%. Okay, so that's step 1. Step 2, now we're going to go ahead and determine what the break even in sales should be. So in order to do that, we're going to go ahead and take our fixed costs, so total fixed costs, and we're going to divide it by the contribution margin ratio, which was completed in step 1. So total fixed costs, $11,200, divided by 0.28, or 28%. Okay, that gives us that's an even number. $40,000. Okay, and this is the total sales in dollars, so in dollar amount that is needed in order to break even. So going back over here to company A. So in order to figure out what is needed to break even in units, we have it here for company A that they need 622 units in order to break even. All right, so in order to cover their fixed cost of $11,200, break even in dollars, in dollar amounts, they need to sell. Total sales need to be $40,000. This is what that amount is. This amount, 40,000. Total sales need to be 40,000 in order for them to break even and also cover their fixed costs. Now we move on to company B, and we're going to do the same thing. Step 1, we're going to have to determine what the contribution margin ratio should be. And so we're going to take contribution margin per unit divided by sales per unit. Okay, so our contribution margin per unit is $22. Sales per unit for company B, it is $42. So 22 divided by 42, that gives us 0.52380954. So I'm just going to make this 40 or 52%. Lastly, step 2, take the total fixed costs and divide it by the contribution margin ratio. So for company B, total fixed costs came out to be $19,750. Then the contribution margin ratio is 0.52 or 52%. All right, so the break even in dollar sales comes out to be $37,980.7692, so 0.7692. What I'm going to do is just round it to the nearest whole dollar, which is going to be $37,981. Okay, so this is saying that in order for them to break even in dollars, or basically just to break even, they need to sell or have total sales or generate total sales of $37,981. That will be just enough to cover their total fixed costs.